The Meek Shall Inherit the Earth, a 5-part series by Larkey and Atlantean Astrology. Part 5. Reclaiming Spiritual Awakening and Challenging the Traditional Concept of Meekness. Throughout this exploration of meekness, we have sought to unravel the deeper meanings behind the Beatitudes, particularly the statement, "Blessed are the meek, for they shall inherit the earth." Matthew 5:5. Traditionally understood as a commendation of humility and passive submission, the word meek has long been exalted as a virtue in Christian thought. The meek are often seen as those who bear their suffering with patience, endure hardship without complaint, and humbly submit to authority as part of their faith. However, we have now reinterpreted meekness not as a moral virtue but as a state of weakness and submission, often weaponized by rulers, religious leaders, and political institutions to keep populations docile and compliant. This understanding paints a stark contrast between the traditional view and the argument presented here, that the meek represent those who fail to seek spiritual illumination, opting instead to follow the rules of the land and remain in mental and spiritual darkness. This final section will address the broader implications of this reinterpretation, challenging Christian orthodoxy and offering a more radical, illuminating understanding of what it means to follow Jesus' message. It will also examine the nature of the kingdom of heaven, the conditions of inheritance, and the consequences for those who reject the deeper truths that Jesus revealed. The kingdom of heaven, beyond submission. One of the core questions that arises from this discussion is what it means to inherit the kingdom of heaven. For centuries, Christians have been taught that entrance into the kingdom of heaven is a reward for faith, humility, and good works. Meekness, in this traditional framework, is often portrayed as a crucial characteristic of those who will be welcomed into God's eternal kingdom. Those who suffer in this life, the thinking goes, will be rewarded in the next, and those who submit to authority will be exalted. However, as we have argued, the meekness that Jesus refers to in Matthew 5:5 is not a virtue to be praised, but a condition of spiritual blindness and passivity. The meek do not inherit the kingdom of heaven because they have not sought the spiritual truth that would open the gates to this higher reality. Instead, their inheritance is the earth, a symbolic representation of the material world, the world of suffering, oppression, and impermanence. In Jesus' teachings, the kingdom of heaven is not simply a place that one enters after death. It is a state of spiritual enlightenment that begins in this life. Jesus repeatedly emphasizes that the kingdom of heaven is at hand, that it is within reach for those who are willing to seek it. The key to entering this kingdom is not submission to worldly authority or passively accepting one's place in society, but rather a radical transformation of the self, a conscious rejection of the systems of control that keep people in bondage. The kingdom of heaven, then, is not for the weak or the compliant. It is for those who have the courage to resist the forces of oppression, to question the rules of the land, and to pursue the deeper truths of existence. Those who inherit the kingdom are not those who follow the rules blindly, but those who seek to break free from the mental and spiritual chains that bind them. The meek, by contrast, do not inherit this kingdom because they have chosen to remain attached to the material world, content with the false promises of earthly inheritance. This idea of spiritual reincarnation is further validated by Jesus' acknowledgement that John the Baptist was the reincarnation of Elijah. In Matthew 11:13-14, Jesus directly states that John the Baptist was the fulfillment of the prophecy that Elijah would return. And if you're willing to accept it, he is Elijah who is to come. This biblical evidence supports the notion that reincarnation, at least in certain cases, was recognized by Jesus as part of the spiritual journey. Therefore, when Jesus said that the meek will inherit the earth, it was not a statement of divine reward for their submission, but a revelation that those who remain in spiritual passivity will continue to reincarnate into the material world, bound to earthly existence until they awaken to the higher truths. The consequences for those who choose to remain in the state of meekness are profound. By choosing to follow the rules of the land rather than seeking spiritual awakening, the meek cut themselves off from the kingdom of heaven. They are bound to the material world, where the systems of power, oppression, and exploitation dominate. Their inheritance is the earth, not because they are spiritually blessed, but because they have chosen to remain tethered to the transient earthly realm. This choice to remain in spiritual darkness is a rejection of the truth that Jesus came to reveal. Jesus' message was one of illumination, of opening people's eyes to the deeper realities of life, love, justice, and the divine. Throughout the Gospels, Jesus consistently calls for a radical rethinking of both religious and societal values. He challenges the legalism of the Pharisees, the hypocrisy of the religious elite, and the oppressive systems of Roman rule. His message is one of spiritual liberation, not submission. The meek, however, choose to remain in ignorance. They accept the world as it is, without questioning the structures that govern it. They follow the rules of the land, not because they are righteous, but because they are comfortable in their submission. They do not seek to understand the deeper truths that Jesus offers, because these truths are too disruptive, too threatening to their way of life. This choice to remain in darkness has eternal consequences. The kingdom of heaven is reserved for those who have awakened to the truth, who have broken free from the chains of ignorance and submission. The meek, by remaining in their state of mental and spiritual passivity, exclude themselves from this kingdom. Their inheritance is the earth, but it is an inheritance that comes with the weight of continued suffering, oppression, and spiritual blindness. Reincarnation, therefore, is not an abstract concept here, but a spiritual truth. As Jesus pointed out with the example of John the Baptist being the reincarnation of Elijah, the meek who fail to seek spiritual illumination will remain in the cycles of reincarnation. They will inherit the earth, remaining bound to the physical world until they achieve spiritual enlightenment and move beyond the limitations of their meekness. This reinterpretation of meekness and the kingdom of heaven challenges many of the core assumptions of traditional Christian theology. For centuries, the Church has taught that meekness is a virtue, that those who endure suffering without complaint, who submit to authority, and who follow the rules of the land, are the ones who will be rewarded in the afterlife. This teaching has been used to pacify populations, to keep them compliant, and to prevent them from rising up against unjust systems of power. However, as we have explored, Jesus' true message was far more radical. His teachings were not about passive submission to worldly authority, but about a revolutionary transformation of the self and society. Jesus called for a rejection of the values of the world, the pursuit of power, wealth, and status, and a commitment to the values of the kingdom of heaven: love, justice, truth, and spiritual enlightenment. The meek are not those who embody the values of the kingdom of heaven, but those who have rejected these values. They are the weak-minded, the submissive, and the easily manipulated. They are the ones who follow the rules without question, who accept their suffering without seeking justice, and who remain in spiritual darkness because it is easier than pursuing the light of truth. By challenging the traditional interpretation of meekness, we are also calling for a re-examination of what it means to be a follower of Jesus. To follow Jesus is not to be meek in the traditional sense, but to be bold, courageous, and spiritually awakened. It is to seek the truth, even when that truth is uncomfortable or disruptive. It is to challenge the systems of power that keep people in bondage, whether those systems are political, religious, or cultural. The teachings of Jesus consistently emphasize that the kingdom of heaven is not an automatic inheritance for those who endure suffering blindly. Instead, it is for those who actively seek the truth and resist the systems of oppression that keep them in spiritual bondage. This directly challenges the traditional Christian interpretation of meekness, where submission and compliance are seen as the paths to salvation. In reality, Jesus' message was about awakening and resisting the structures of the world that prevent spiritual growth. The example of John the Baptist as the reincarnation of Elijah serves as a clear reminder that spiritual awakening is a process, one that requires active pursuit of deeper truths. The meek, by contrast, remain in a cycle of reincarnation, inheriting the earth because they are not yet ready to transcend the material plane. They will continue to reincarnate until they break free from the limitations of their spiritual passivity. The call to spiritual awakening. The central message of Jesus' teachings is a call to spiritual awakening. The kingdom of heaven is not a place that can be inherited through passive submission or compliance with the rules of the land. It is a state of being that is accessible to those who are willing to seek it, to question the world as it is, and to embrace the higher truths that Jesus revealed. The path to spiritual awakening is not easy. It requires the individual to break free from the mental and spiritual chains that bind them to the material world. It requires the courage to challenge authority, to resist societal norms, and to seek justice in the face of oppression. Those who walk this path are not meek. They are spiritually strong, willing to face the discomfort of awakening in order to inherit the kingdom of heaven. Jesus' call to take up your cross and follow me, Matthew 16:24, is not a call to passivity. It is a call to radical transformation, to leave behind the comforts of the material world and to pursue the truth of God's kingdom, no matter the cost. The cross, a symbol of suffering and sacrifice, represents the struggle of spiritual awakening. It is a struggle against the forces of oppression, ignorance, and submission that keep people in bondage. Those who choose to follow this path will face opposition. The systems of power that govern the material world, whether political, religious, or economic, are designed to keep people meek, to prevent them from awakening to the truth. To take up the cross is to resist these systems, to live by the values of the kingdom of heaven, even when it goes against the rules of the land. Meekness as a blessing, not a compliment. In light of this deeper understanding, it becomes clear that Jesus' words about the meek inheriting the earth were not a compliment to their current state. Instead, Jesus was blessing the meek, acknowledging their current spiritual blindness and expressing the hope that they would one day awaken. The inheritance of the earth is not a reward for their passive submission, but a temporary state, reflecting the ongoing reincarnation and cycles of earthly life until they fully grasp the truth of his message. Jesus' statement, "Blessed are the meek, for they shall inherit the earth," Matthew 5:5, was not meant to praise the meekness of those who followed the rules of the land without question. Rather, it was a challenge for them to awaken from their spiritual passivity. By inheriting the earth, the meek are bound to the material world, but Jesus' blessing is a signal that this state is temporary. Through his teachings, he offered the opportunity for the meek to eventually rise above their earthly attachments and seek the kingdom of heaven. Meekness as a temporary state before awakening. True spiritual meekness in this context is not about remaining submissive or complying with worldly systems. Jesus' message was to shake the foundations of religious and societal norms, urging people to resist the forces that keep them trapped in ignorance. The meek, in their pre-awakened state, are destined to reincarnate and continue inheriting the earth until they are ready to awaken to the truth. The idea of meekness is therefore a transitional state in which individuals are still attached to the rules of the land and worldly authority. Jesus did not intend for them to remain in this state, but blessed them with the potential to awaken. He offered them the hope that one day they would seek the truth beyond the earthly realm and move toward spiritual enlightenment. The blessing for the meek is ultimately a blessing of hope, a message that they can transcend their current condition. Jesus' true message was one of spiritual empowerment, urging the meek to question the rules of the world and to strive for the kingdom of heaven, a realm that can only be accessed through active spiritual seeking and the courage to resist the systems of oppression that trap people in cycles of earthly existence. Conclusion of Part 5. In conclusion, this reinterpretation of meekness challenges the traditional Christian understanding that meekness is a virtue of submission and humility. Rather, Jesus' blessing of the meek was not an endorsement of their current state, but a call to spiritual awakening. He was acknowledging their condition of spiritual passivity and offering a blessing that one day they would awaken and break free from the cycles of earthly reincarnation. The kingdom of heaven is not for those who remain in spiritual complacency. It is for those who actively seek to awaken, challenge the forces that keep them bound to the material world, and live by the higher values of truth, love, and justice. By reinterpreting the message to the meek, we gain a profound understanding of Jesus' true call, not to remain in meek submission, but to rise up, awaken, and seek the divine truth he revealed.